Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays. You can ask gardening questions in the comment section down below, and that'll be your question. Thank you guys again. I say this every week. Thanks for your participation, because without your questions, there is no question and answer video, and you guys continue to ask great questions. And I tend to pick about 20, somewhere between 20 and 25 each week to answer. The Learn to Garden video series, several people took advantage of from a video earlier in the week. I said there was a $50 gift, a $50 off discount code, which is fall50, that you could use for the month of September, and several of you took advantage of that this week, so I appreciate it. The Learn to Garden video series is over on my website if you're interested, and again, that $50 discount code is good for the month of September. Let's see, there's a ground cover video that went up this week, possibly a weeping trees video that should be up before you see this one. I don't remember what else, but I'm down visiting some nurseries down south. There's a lot of interesting summer damage in the nurseries this year, just based on heat, this unexpected heat that has just been this heat dome. Seems like everywhere, and the plants have definitely, some of the plants have definitely taken it tough in these nursery environments. Sometimes we're pushing these plants in a nursery and they're fertilizing them, and the fertilizer can dump, from their fertilizer's in an encapsulated prill, and at a certain temperature, sometimes that fertilizer can all dump out at once, so that can cause problems. Just the heat literally cooking the plants. There's just a lot of interesting problems I have observed down here on the in the deep south. I think it's just gotten sunnier out of the blue, so we're going to make an adjustment to the camera here and try to fix that. All right, let's jump into some questions. Let's see. Somebody asked about resetting 40-year-old azaleas, meaning can they just cut them? Cut them back to the ground, and when would they do it? Yeah, you can absolutely cut azaleas back to the ground and get them to come back out. The thing is, obviously they're not going to bloom. Old azaleas are, bloom on old growth. So they've already probably, if they haven't, they're in the process of establishing their spring flower buds right now. So if you wanted to enjoy them flowering in the spring, maybe they don't flower very much in the spring. I have no idea. But if you're interested in them flowering one more time before you cut them back, then you'd wait till after they bloomed. If not, you just cut them down sometime a little later in the, I would say mid to late winter or early spring. You can cut them right down to the ground, and they should come right back out of that. I would take the opportunity to clean everything up around them, get off all the old leaves that had accumulated underneath, and then mulch the space well, give them a light application of fertilizer at that same time, late winter, early spring, and they should respond pretty well from that. If not, you pull them out and move on. So sometimes we can give them a chance, and then, if not. Somebody's up in zone 6A and wants a loropetalum replacement. Unfortunately, there's not really, a plant like that that's, evergreen and purple, leafy plant like loropetalum that grows in those colder areas. You guys are generally speaking using barberries, and barberries have been listed as invasive, but there are barberries on the market now that are seed-free, and so are sterile cultivars. So you can research sterile cultivars of barberries and at least have the season, when they're leafed out, with that same, with a similar coloration. I've got the one at the house, that Luton Rouge, which isn't available yet, but it soon will be. It's a seed, it's a sterile cultivar that stays really compact, similar to my lower growing Purple Daydream loropetalum at the house. So you have that option, but again, make sure you're using one that's, one of the newer sterile cultivars, so you're not, putting additional invasive plants out there. Let's see. So somebody asked about picking bulbs. They're in Bel Air, Maryland, and they're looking to get 2 to 4 varieties of bulbs. They're ordering from Color Blends. I actually have my Color Blends bulbs coming sometime, I guess probably in October. I'll go over that at some point. I haven't even made a video for what I've ordered, and I normally have done that at this point. I haven't gotten around to it yet. So if you're in zone 7, daffodils are always great. You know, in zone 7, 8, 9, in the warmer areas of the country, you can always rely on daffodils to come back. They have, the Color Blends website has a southern list of the bulbs that they would recommend for the south, and that's what I would pick from. So I'm probably going to avoid a lot of the hybrid tulips and that kind of thing, because they won't necessarily get enough cold in the wintertime to come back reliably for you. So that's what I would suggest, is go over to the Color Blends thing, pick that little summer bulb tab, and then pick from that. And even there, it eliminates some of the daffodils that don't do quite as well in the warmer areas. So it's just the bulbs, you know, that will reliably come back with not a lot of chill hours in your area. Okay, so somebody's in zone 8B in Tallahassee. They planted a moon dance hydrangea paniculata. Wouldn't matter if it was moon dance or what it was, and it's losing leaves and looking tough. That's the result of a very, very tough summer and a newer planted plant. They have it in the absolute full sun, and I think in a normal year in Tallahassee you would have been fine with a hydrangea paniculata in full sun. I mean, they're in the fields out here on black fabric along the Gulf Coast, exactly where you are, right in line with where you are. There's nurseries that are growing them in the full sun on black fabric, and they're doing just fine. I think that yours probably just didn't get an adequate amount of water, you know, at some point, and it went into some sort of minor dormancy. But again, I have said before that some of these plants that we say are for full sun may need a little bit of shade, you know, as you go further and further south. But that particular plant, I'm in the Gulf Coast right now in a hotter area even than Tallahassee, west of you, and you know, they're growing on black fabric in the middle of a field. So I think it's probably more of a immature plant problem in an abnormally nasty summer, and that next year, as long as it's alive and the limbs are still pliable, you know, they'll bend without breaking. You can scratch it, get a little green under the stem. They'll come back next spring and look great next year, hopefully with a more normal summer. Let's see. So somebody asked about using rock rather than mulch to keep down Bermuda grass. So they'd like to mulch their beds basically with gravel or something like that. It probably would slow the growth a bit on Bermuda grass. Not to say Bermuda grass isn't capable of growing through rock and between stones and on, you know, between sidewalk cracks and all kinds of things, because it is. But it probably would grow slower in a rock area, but you would no longer be really improving the soil in those beds. So as an alternative that I would propose is maybe put a band of gravel or some sort of rock between the Bermuda and the bed. It gives you basically a defendable space between your plants and between the turf area, you know, just as a trade-off. But I would want to always use organic material in my beds, just because as that organic material breaks down, there's 1,000 benefits that I've talked about on the channel. But I feel your pain with Bermuda grass. I really do. I don't like it at all. It's terrible to garden with. So somebody asked, if I was ever going to visit Lou Gardens in Orlando because of their incredible camellia collection. I've been there in the past before this channel existed. And yeah, I would love to one day take the camera through there at this point. But a lot of these gardens, as you guys may or may not have seen on the channel, you know, I've visited lots and lots of them, you know, beforehand. There's almost nowhere I go that I don't look up the botanic garden that's there, and will make an extra half a day to do that as part of any traveling that I'm doing. But yes, thank you for that suggestion too. It's a fantastic garden in the Orlando, Florida area. Let me see, somebody asked about having an amethyst wisteria grow up an established oak tree. It absolutely will. In that shady of a space though, it will probably need to get way up in the tree before it's putting on any very many flowers. And so this is the problem. The amethyst amethyst wisteria is one of our native, is part of one of our native species. And it will grow up that oak, but it probably won't bloom a whole lot until it's up in the top of it. And so I think you're better off putting your wisteria on a fence or someplace that's actually getting some more sun, because you can keep it whatever size you want, and that sun will allow it to bloom more heavily. I think in too shady of a space, it's not going to bloom well until it gets all the way up into that tree and get some sunlight, which could be several years, and by that point actually be a hindrance to the tree, perhaps. At that point, I don't know. Let's see, somebody asked about buying smaller plants. I always talk about buying smaller plants when I can. We're lucky. Big Bloomers is a place that I go here in North Carolina, and generally they have some smaller plants. They were just saying there's not a lot of availability of smaller plants, things in like quart pots, that everything they see is in either gallons, 3 gallons, 5, 7s, 15 gallons, whatever. But I've actually seen the container. I saw the mock-up for the container for the Southern Living Plant Collection is working even on a quart program. So I think that more people are thinking about it, more companies are thinking about it, and I've seen a few more things at the front of some of the box stores and garden centers where they're doing some quart programs. So I think that more and more that's going to come as time goes by, because it's the right price point, for consumers, and for those of you who, including myself, I like to watch plants grow, number one, and number two, it's just easy to dig that quart hole and just walk away and be done with it if you're planting in a time of year where it's not super stressful. So somebody in Zone 7, their laurel hedge got badly damaged in that freeze last winter. It's coming back from the bottom. They wanted to know if they should fertilize them this fall. No, I definitely wouldn't do anything to encourage. That new growth that you've gotten this season is great, and what I would do is just let that go dormant naturally in the fall, and then fertilize it in the late winter, early spring as it's emerging from that dormancy. You wouldn't want to push any new growth on it, because you might get it within the realm of possibility that new growth could be damaged again going into fall. So let it go to sleep on its own. You have a root system based on a much larger plant, and I think as it comes out in that second season with the little fertilizer and have the area mulched, weed-free, ready to go, I think you'll get a tremendous amount of growth next spring. But be patient until then. Let's see, gold mop cypress reset. Yes. I have cut gold mop cypress back really hard. I had one at the old house that was next to my deck, and it had gotten, 8 to 10 feet tall, and I cut it down to 3 feet tall, and it came back out of it beautifully. Again, this is another winter, late winter, early spring pruning job that I would do, but you can reset gold mop cypress, and they actually respond to it quite well. I just definitely wouldn't do it now, because you'd be exposing foliage underneath that would be badly damaged very quickly. Okay, so somebody asked if they could limb up blue spruces. So they've got some blue spruces that are blocking the view of some other gardening that they've done behind it. Yeah, absolutely. You can limb up your blue spruces. I would do it slowly over a few years. I wouldn't go out there and cut half the limbs all the way, halfway up the tree immediately. Maybe take the bottom row off, give it a season, take the next row off, and just do it over time, so you're not just, cut the bottom row off and let it respond, and then limb it up over 2 or 3 year period of time. Is probably what I would do. Let's see. I'm just trying to eliminate stress, and again, winter, early spring, something like that. So somebody bought an Arrow Point holly and they can't find any more. Why? Arrow Point is one of Dr. Reuter's, and they put up the Latin name, which is R-U-T something. If you see that R-U-T, that's Dr. Reuter down at the University of Georgia's introduction. The main reason you can't find the plants is because the nurseries are very thin on plant material. So it's not any particular reason why you wouldn't find a plant at that time. It's just, actually there's quite a few behind me right now, but there's empty space here where I'm standing, and pretty much every nursery that I go to, there's, if I put up my drone over the top, I'm gonna see empty fabric and empty gravel all over the place. Nobody's been able to catch up. The COVID boom in gardening has not slowed. And then on top of that, we've had hurricane seasons that were bad. We've had heat stresses that were bad. Failed crops for various reasons in various places. And nurseries being cautious, thinking that the COVID thing was going to, because your business goes up 30% one year doesn't mean that's going to sustain. And so everybody thinking, well, maybe we're going to be down 6% this year, or just up 2%, and they're up another 10%. And, you just can't stamp these plants out. Some of these plants will take 3 to 4 years from a rooted cutting you know, to get them out into the market. So that's more what you're seeing than anything else. If you're not finding the thing you're looking for, that's likely what it is. Somebody's Caryopteris got a lot taller than they expected it to get. It's like 70 inches tall. And it's first choice, which mine is, you know, probably right at 3 foot tall, and hasn't tried to get any bigger than that. So one question I would have, is it first choice Caryopteris? Was it tagged wrong potentially? I don't know. They asked if it would get the same size next year. It will probably try to get even bigger. They're going to cut it down to, you know, I would cut it down to about 1 foot tall in the wintertime and see how it responds. But if it grew 70 inches this year, no reason to believe it's not going to do that every single year. You may, when you cut it back to 1 foot tall, based on what I just said, decide whether it's in the correct place in your garden. You may need to slide it back. But I don't know why yours is getting literally double the height that mine is. I'm doing no additional pruning. After I pruned that thing down in the wintertime, I pruned it down to what? Maybe 1 foot, a little less than 1 foot maybe. And it's only gotten back to 3 feet wide and maybe 4 feet. No, 3 feet tall and maybe 4 feet wide. Okay, so if you plant something in too much shade, will it be more likely to get winter damage? This is a good question, and the answer is, I don't know. If you put something in too much shade and it's under stress going into winter, yeah, that could make it more vulnerable to winter damage. But with that said, shady conditions tend to offer protection in the wintertime. Even without leaves, you know, trees tend to offer some protection from frost. And so, you know, I find that shady spaces, they moderate the heat during the summer and they moderate the cold during the winter. So you may find that you don't get any more winter damage, but the plant is not going to do its best, you know, if it's in less sun than it wants to be in. But, you know, it's a good question. It could go either way. A stressed plant, obviously more vulnerable to the cold. Shady spaces tend to offer a buffer for heat and cold. So, you know, I wouldn't know. It would probably be a plant-to-plant kind of issue. So somebody has Oakland and Nellie Stevens hollies with multiple leaders. Is that okay? Yes, that's how they grow. I was in 2 nurseries yesterday, and every Oakland holly and every Nellie Stevens has 4 leaders coming out the top. They shear them into little pyramids, you know, little cone-shaped things, and then when the new leaders come out, it's always 4, 5, 6 leaders up at the top. It won't matter on those hollies at all. It matters on some trees for sure that you don't want a lot of different leaders, otherwise they crack open or whatever. On those hollies though, even if they got damaged for some reason, you can just reset them and they'd come back anyway. So, but that's completely normal on them. Any plant you're pruning on like that's probably going to produce multiple leaders going forward. So somebody said they're 63 years old, and they started gardening 3.5 years ago, and this heat has been brutal, and you know the results in the garden have been brutal because of the heat, and they just needed some encouragement. And you know, I think that several people, you know, responded down below because this is such a nice group of people to this. And you know, one thing I would suggest to anyone who's gardening in maybe particularly hot area, or it's related to your age or some sort of physical ability, whatever it is, to think about maybe scaling down a bit the space that you're maintaining, and giving yourself the opportunity to for your effort to go further. You know, you're the same hour you spend in 100 square feet versus 200 square feet, you know, can go a much further. So maybe reducing the amount of space that you're trying to really be detailed in. In the remaining spaces, perhaps put woody shrubs or small ornamental trees and things that don't necessarily need you to maintain them. Just some of the tougher, you know, I've got lots of videos on the channel. They start with tough ground cover or tough shade plant or tough foundation plants, tough screening plants, whatever. If I have those kind of titles on them, those are the kinds of plants you can use in some of those spaces and just have a green backdrop and then really concentrate on a smaller area. But I definitely feel, you know, I'm 53 now, and I can definitely feel a difference from when I was 33 doing this. There's no question that every year, you know, it's a little bit more draining, and the summers, whether they are or aren't, definitely seem tougher, and they seem tougher on the plants as well. So I definitely, you know, literally feel what you're talking about, and you know, stick to it, and maybe, you know, narrow down a bit on what you're trying to accomplish, so that you can actually spend some time enjoying it and not feeling like it's constant labor. Okay. So somebody has a river birch planted near their leach field. Should they move it? Yes, for sure. River birches are definitely going to be on the list of things that I would not want to be planted next to my leach field and my septic system. Very, very aggressive root systems on them. And if they find your leach field, you'll really see that tree grow very quickly, because, you know, that's all the nutrients and water that river birch would ever need. A lot of people asked about that cordyline that was in last week's video, little red spiky plant that was over to my right. That is a cordyline called Charlie Boy, and it's part of the Southern Living Plant Collection and the Sunset Plant Collection as well. And I was doing a video on it for a grower guide to teach nurserymen how to grow that plant. So that's why I had it at the house, and that's why it was in that video. But that is, the cordylines are like interesting. They look a little bit like yuccas, but they're from like New Zealand and Australia, Polynesia. Is where all the cordylines are from. They're super interesting plants. There's lots of them. They actually grow equally as well in the southeast as they do in the desert southwest. You know, need pretty good drainage in the east, but other than that, I mean, it's mounded up some. They work great. It's an asparagus family member. There's so many members of the asparagus family. It's a giant family of plants, the Asparagaceae. But that's what that plant was a Charlie Boy cordyline. So somebody bought 2 roses this past last year, didn't get around to planting them. They ended up on their patio for the winter, and then they planted them in the spring, and they've barely grown since they planted them in the spring, and they've only produced a couple of flowers. Again, this is the first season that they're in the ground, and you know, while most of the time roses will hit the ground running, you know, it's not like this has been a completely normal spring. If you feel like after this winter, if they don't break out of that next spring, that they're not putting on a growth, feel free to replant things. You know, I say this all the time. If it seems like something's lingering, don't do this the first season. The first season, it can just be transplant shock, heat stress, you've underwatered it, you've overwatered, something's happened. But if something lingers into that next year, doesn't start to kick in, doesn't feel like it's moving forward, feel free to dig it up and replant it. You know, plant it in a different space, add some different organic material to it, mound it up a little more. You know, maybe it's mounded up too much. I don't know how much, you know, they said they had mounded it up a bit when they planted it. Some person had told them that roses don't do well in Columbia, South Carolina, and to look around, you won't see any roses. That's not really true. I was in Columbia, South Carolina earlier this year. And filmed a garden down there, and there are plenty of roses. You know, in the southeast, when we're dealing with roses, you know, because of our humidity at times, we can, you know, they can be maybe susceptible to a few other things, but most of these roses are hardy from zone 4 to zone 10. So literally everyone watching, and this is why roses are the #1 category of plants. It's roses, and then hydrangeas, and then other things miles down below. But those are the 2 big categories of plants. And if I look at the questions on a week-to-week basis, that roses, hydrangea, roses, hydrangea, you know, those are the questions that I get, because so many roses are sold. But you can definitely grow roses in your area. And again, feel free to replant it in the spring if it doesn't get to jumping after it has a winter rest period underneath it. You know, then replant it. So somebody has gardenia that has some yellow leaves on the interior. I've talked about this many times. Gardenia is a plant that will shed those interior leaves, and they're bright, bright yellow when it happens. So it stands out from a mile. You can see, you know, that when they're shedding, typically when they're shedding, they're putting on flower buds in the late spring, and they'll do some shedding because they're going to flower no matter what. Plants want to flower. They want to flower, and they'll expend old foliage to do it. And then they have some camellias that were shedding some leaves at the same time. I think in the case of these two, the camellia is probably in this time of summer shedding a few leaves because it is almost time for that Camellia sasanqua to be blooming in October. The gardenia is probably just shedding some leaves because it's just been hot, just incredibly hot and dry. But usually if it's in old interior leaves, I don't worry about it a whole lot. I figure it got dry at some point. It's not necessarily dry today, but over the last 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, it probably got dry, and it decided to to balance everything out by losing a third of its leaves. Let's see. And then last question, somebody asked about when I'm going to be putting up the video for the new boxwoods. I've talked about a couple times. I have 4. I'm going to spin you guys around this direction. There's a big giant field out there, and then right behind me, right here, are some of the boxwoods from Better Boxwood. There is, I think you guys we're a little crooked now. This is some of the Better Boxwoods here. There's 4 varieties. I'll put these videos up next spring. It's going to be a little while before there's a lot of availability on these. These are new ones here. You can tell in a 2-gallon container. Nice little looking boxwoods. But this Better Boxwood series will be everywhere next spring, and certainly by that fall of 2024, literally everywhere. We're going to be marketed in a big way. They're fantastic plants. It's 4 distinct shapes of boxwoods. So one is very upright and narrow, one is upright and slightly wider, one is a large hedging type boxwood, and one is a little low doming variety. And so there's 4 of them, 4 distinct shapes, and I'll start talking about them more this following spring because there really just isn't a lot of availability. But I'm riding through nurseries, and there's going to be a lot of, when they're finished, there's going to be a lot of them. Boxwoods take a little longer than other things to grow. So thank you guys very much. Don't forget there's a $50 discount code this month only, fall 50, on the Learn to Garden video series over on my website. And you can ask gardening questions down below, and I'll be back next week with another question and answer video. Thanks for participating. One quick note, this is a variegated osmanthus. It's actually going to be called Misty River. It's not available yet. This is about all there are of them, but this one is going to be a fantastic Southern Living Plant Collection release.